Almost 12 years ago, my wife and I pulled our kids out of school. They were aged 9, 7, and 5. And today, the eldest, who's 20, almost 21, she's at Oxford studying French and Arabic. The middle one, who's almost 19, he just got an offer from one of the world's top coding universities, 42, which he's about to start on. He's got like 4 or 5 years full-time work experience where he's been earning money, and he's also the youngest person in the history of the A-level, that's the UK exam for 18-year-olds, to have got an A. He did that when he was age 10, and the youngest, Sabine, who's soon turning 17, she has a year to go before she starts a degree at Cambridge University, where she'll be doing land economy. And so homeschool for our family was absolutely fantastic, has worked out really well. And what I'd like to do in this video is just explain the journey for us to get there. So our kids, we never planned on homeschooling our kids up to just before 12 years ago. Honestly, I would have thought you were totally nuts if you told me that you homeschooled your kids. I would have really wanted to end the conversation, thinking there was some kind of mental case. But within a few months from that view, we had pulled our kids out of school, and I'd just like to go through the thinking behind it. So it all starts around, I reckon, I can't remember the dates, but around 13 years ago. So a friend of mine came over to Malaysia, which is where I was living at the time with my family, and his kids were homeschooled. I actually don't know why he homeschooled his kids, but they were homeschooled, and they were really nice, and I was really surprised. So they stayed with us, so I got to know them really well, and the kids were sociable. That was the first thing that everyone's who's concerned about homeschooling has about their social skills. So they were actually more sociable than most school kids that I'd met. And they were I don't know why I do this, but with kids I'll often just ask them a few maths questions to gauge where they are. I'm kind of physics grad, so I to do that. And the girl, I think she must have been 9 at the time, she was way ahead of most 9-year-olds. And I was just really surprised. She must have been the age of the kind of standard of a 14, 15-year-old at the time. So I just for me, that was a bit of a weird experience. But at that point, it wasn't I was even remotely considering, none of my wife and I weren't considering, homeschooling our kids. We just thought, okay, wow, this is rather interesting. Happens to be, by the way, from that family, they've got 4 children. The elder 2 have already got into Oxford and Cambridge. They weren't homeschooled the whole way. Anyway, that's just a side point. Okay, so this, they went back to the UK, these friends, and that was it. So another thing happened was I was at the time hiring remotely. So in Malaysia, I was hiring people in Europe. So we were working remotely 12 years ago, 13 years ago. That was not normal at all. You're thinking, why the hell would I be hiring people from Malaysia in Europe? Because basically, for the things that we were looking for, there just wasn't that kind of talent, and we wanted really good talent. So we were actually kind of reverse, going the other way, rather than most people would be hiring in cheaper countries. We were doing the other way around, but that was because we wanted quality, and that was something that was very kind of weird at the time, but we were doing it and it was working out really well. So that kind of the remote thing plays a part in it. Now my wife, our kids were going to a local school. I actually wanted to send our kids to an international school, a UK curriculum international school. My wife, she kind of makes all the decisions on this kind of stuff, and she decided basically, it was I kind of tried to convince her otherwise, but she wanted to send them to a local school. I think she kind of felt that the most important thing, one of the reasons we moved to Malaysia in the first place, was the values. My wife really, for her anyway, she really believed that the kids could get a better value system, the Asian value system, and that's something that that was one of the motivations why we moved to Malaysia. So moving to getting our kids into a local school kind of made sense, right, for her anyway. But I was kind of I thought the standard probably wasn't going to be as high. That was my concern, and I guess that wasn't the case, but that I had that concern. And so because I had that concern with my kids going to these, the eldest 2 going to, the youngest one was probably not going to school at the time, but with the eldest 2 going to this local school, I was like concerned that they would be kind of like lacking in certain subjects, particularly maths. So what I started doing was, when I was dropping them to school on the way there, on the 8-minute journey there, I was teaching them maths. So they'd be in the back, I would be driving. I didn't have a blackboard, obviously, but I'd be teaching them, basic stuff. And it soon kind of like transpired that essentially they were learning more maths in that 8-minute journey than they were at school. And so that kind of got me thinking a little bit. And also, so then I kind of thought, why? I mean, if the one-on-one teaching of 8 minutes can do them kind of like so much good, why don't I just kind of get them a tutor? So that's where the remote kind of thing came along. I guess we could have hired a local teacher to come to our place, but we just hired a remote tutor. She was based in the Philippines, and she started teaching them maths. And basically, their maths started progressing super fast. So by the way, our kids, all of our kids at the local school that they were going to, they were not like super geniuses. They were in the, I think the class was about 20 in size. They would come in the top 3-ish, like, often first, second, third. But yet at the same, I think a large part of that was because my wife was kind of like, making sure they studied, whatever. That's what, that's basically one of the key reasons why kids do well, is because their parents make them study, and that was the case for my kids. So, they're not like some geniuses that were just like, we pull them out of school because school was too easy. They were just like performing well. At this point, we still, homeschool is not even really an idea, right? And, it's just kind of like things are going well for them at school, and, they're kind of progressing well in, maths and maybe the other subjects I was planning on kind of picking up later, but for maths was fine for now. So then the idea comes from, I just kind of thought of, why don't we just homeschool the kids? I don't know where the idea came from. It was like, okay, look, it's kind of like putting everything together, which is, they're learning a lot quicker with this one-on-one tutor. We've got a great example. We had seen these kids that stayed over with us. They were fine. They had no issues. Why don't we just like homeschool our kids? And there's also an element of, basically, when I was at school, I was actually quite disruptive at school. I actually didn't learn anything in school. I'm not the best listener in the world, if I'm honest. And what I do is I kind of doss around at school and kind of have fun and like, make fun of teachers or whatever, not pay attention in class. But what I used to do, and I did very well at school, like really, really well at school, what I do is kind of study in the evenings and understand, do things in my own time, and it worked really well. So basically, it was kind of like, with that in mind as well, because I taught myself everything at school, basically, and at university, actually. So I kind of like, I knew or had experienced the benefit of, or I'd experienced self-study. I'd basically self-studied all the way from around 13. So anyway, not trying to take away any credit from my teachers, but that really is the case. So anyway, so I came up with the idea. I mentioned it to my wife. Now, my wife's very conservative on most matters, and to my surprise, it kind of made sense. She kind of said, "Yeah, let's give it a go." And I was like, really, I thought I'd have to try convincing her or whatever. I did think it was a fantastic, like, crazy idea, and I thought she was going to say no, and it's worth me trying to push it. But she just said, yes, we should give it a go. And then she kind of thought of the plan herself, which was, what she said is, what we should do, I think must have been late, about October, November at the time, and she said what we could do is potentially over the Christmas holidays we could give it a go, and if it works out really well, what we'd do is just pull them out. The school is kind of like a very local school. They would, it's not like I guess they can't make us bring the kids into school, so we would just give them notice, and if it didn't work out well, what we would do is if there was a problem, we were confident enough that we would be able to send them back to school the following year and not lose a year. So we had that kind of confidence. We thought we couldn't mess up that badly. So we also kind of thought, look, it's not really going to work, and we got this right. This is really important. So we also thought that it's not going to work unless the kids really want to do it. We can't pull the kids out of school and they're like complaining about it and they kind of don't cooperate. So we brought it up with the kids. So another thing that was happening, forgot all about this. So another thing that was happening is we wanted our kids to learn these languages and other things. We were taking them to classes over the weekend, sports and whatever. So basically, it's like during the day they were at school, and on the weekends it was non-stop going to this. I mean, they wanted to learn Chinese, Bahasa Malaysia, Arabic, not French. They weren't learning French at the time, but all of these kind of subjects. My son was playing football. after school as well, during weekends. And it just became, they were doing rock climbing, and it was just so much, right? So what we told the kids is, look, this is really too hectic. Most of your we kind of like, most of the time at school is kind of being wasted, and that's what we kind of felt. I still think that's very much the case. And we said, look, we can make your lives so much easier. What you can do is study from 7 to, I think it was 12. That was the plan. 5 hours, pretty much solid. I mean, there'd be little breaks in between. So we said, look, you start studying at 7 to 12, and then you're done. You don't have to do anything on the weekend. And afterwards, there'd be some activities, sports or whatever. You've got to do something, right? But basically, that was the deal. So it's like, your lives are going to be so easy, because we were pretty confident that if they worked fairly hard between 7 and 12, we didn't have any plan what they're going to do, by the way, at this point. We didn't think, okay, they're going to study for this, study for that, what subjects. We just kind of willing to wing it, as it were. So, and I think that's important. You just got to kind of do. There's no point over planning, because you make all these plans. The day your kids start studying, you'll realize that X, Y, Z doesn't work, and you have to try something else. So we didn't even make a plan. So basically, the two younger kids, the boy and the girl, they said yes. And I was a bit concerned, why did they say yes so quickly? Because don't they have any friends? Yeah, but they were at the time about to turn 7, and actually recently turned 7 and recently turned 5, so kind of no big deal. The 9-year-old, the eldest, she kind of was a bit hesitant, and that was quite kind of good sign. She was saying she was going to miss her friends. And so she kind of wasn't sure, right? So she's kind of undecided. But when we kind of told her, look, you can study in your pajamas. Get up in the morning. You don't have to change. There's no morning routine, etc. There's no dropping off. There's no rushing back, etc. And I think the PJs, honestly, did it for her. So studying, and she didn't have to do that whole routine in the morning, and she was in and kind of wanted to kind of go for it as well. So we had the kids buy in, and now it was kind of a case of just doing it. So we waited till the Christmas holidays. Kids were recently turned 9, 7 and 5, and essentially started studying. It was done 7 to 12 every single day. Kids made huge progress in that month, and basically at the end of the Christmas holidays, we gave the school notice. And at that point, I think by this time we kind of knew. The fact that whether they were going to, we knew it was going to work. I mean, I can't say we knew it was going to work, but we were very confident it was going to work, and we were not really worried about them having to come back into school the next year. That kind of thing went out of the equation for us. And now my eldest daughter's in her 3rd year, about to start her 3rd year at Oxford. The youngest will be starting her course at Cambridge next year, and the 18-year-old has recently got a place at 42, which is one of the top coding universities in the world. He's got 5 years work experience. He's got loads of money stashed up, and he's he did his A levels, which is the exam for 18-year-olds. He's the youngest person ever to have got an A. He did it when he was 10. So honestly, it couldn't have worked out much better, really. It really wasn't that much work for us. I think people think we just kind of gave up things. We didn't really. I'd say we probably worked. We didn't teach the kids ourselves. They were mostly self-taught. Early on, we did teach them a bit. We did hire tutors as well, but we didn't work particularly hard with our kids. But we did get a lot of things right, I think, and I go through that in other videos. But that's how our homeschool journey started.